Most people today have heard of the Nicene Creed, but few know its history. It was the year 325 AD, and the Roman Emperor Constantine had called a meeting. All the bishops in the empire were summoned to the city of Nicaea to decide which books belonged in the Bible. But that wasn't actually the main issue. The main issue was this: what is the relationship between Jesus and God? Was Jesus God? Was he just a really good teacher? Or was he something else? See, Christians were arguing about this, and it was getting violent. People were being killed for their beliefs. So Constantine, wanting to put an end to all this, convened a council. He presided over it himself and made sure that the bishops agreed on a statement of faith, what we today call the Nicene Creed. But he didn't care about God or Jesus. He was a politician first and foremost. This is the real story behind the Nicene Creed. To understand what happened here, we must begin with the emperor who called it Constantine the Great. He's known as the first Christian emperor, and according to legend, before a battle in 312 AD, he saw a vision of a cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." He won the battle, defeated his rival, and attributed his victory to the Christian God. Soon after, he issued the Edict of Milan, which made Christianity legal in the Roman Empire. But Constantine's story was way more complicated than the Sunday school version. For one, he wasn't baptized until he was dying. For 25 years after his supposed conversion, he still minted coins with the image of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, a Roman god. And the triumphal arch he built in Rome after his conversion didn't have any Christian symbols. It didn't even have the Chi Rho that he supposedly saw in the sky. Constantine may have favored Christianity over other religions, but he was not a particularly pious man. He kept a foot in the old pagan order and made no secret of his belief in astrology and magic. And when he called the bishops to Nicaea, it was not because he wanted to meditate on the mysteries of the Trinity or to deepen his own faith. He needed peace. A divided church was a divided empire, and Constantine needed unity. As one historian has put it, Constantine did not need Christ to be God. He needed Christianity to be the glue of his empire. What started the fire? The spark that ignited the flames of the Arian controversy was a man named Arius. Now, Arius wasn't some wild heretic with strange foreign ideas. He was a presbyter, a respected elder from Alexandria. He was logical, eloquent, and persuasive, and he argued that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, was not eternal. He wasn't always God. There was a time, Arius said, when he was not. If God the Father is uncreated and eternal, then the Son must have been created. Even if he was created before the world began, Jesus was exalted, but he was not equal with the Father. He was subordinate. Arius had proof texts. He pointed to John 14:28, where Jesus says, "The Father is greater than I." He looked at Proverbs 8:22 in the Greek Septuagint, where wisdom says, "The Lord created me at the beginning of his work." For Arius, Jesus was divine in some sense, but not fully God. The Bishop of Alexandria, Alexander, and his young deacon Athanasius fought back fiercely against the Arians. They argued that if Christ were created, he could not save us. A created being cannot bridge the infinite gap between God and man. Only God himself could redeem humanity. They had their own scriptures. John 1:1 declared that the Word was with God and the Word was God. John 10:30 recorded Jesus saying, "I and the Father are one." Hebrews 1:3 described the Son as the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. The debate was fierce, and it spread quickly, dividing churches, cities, and even entire provinces. Constantine saw the danger. If Rome could not have one Christ, it could not have one empire. So he called for a council, unlike any before. Bishops from across the known Christian world were summoned to the lakeside city of Nicaea in 325 AD. Before we go further, let us clear away the myths. A popular belief is that the Council of Nicaea decided which books would belong to the Bible. This is simply false. The canonization of the New Testament was not settled in 325. It was a centuries-long process, debated in local councils and churches. Some communities revered books like the Shepherd of Hermas or the Epistle of Barnabas, while others doubted Revelation or Hebrews. It was not until later councils, Rome in 382, Hippo in 393, Carthage in 397, and finally Trent in the 16th century, that the canon was fully recognized. Even today, Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox Christians disagree on which books are included. So no, Constantine did not hold up a pile of scrolls and decide which ones to burn. That is fiction, popularized by Voltaire, Dan Brown, and countless internet rumors. The Council of Nicaea was not about the Bible. It was about Christ. Tradition says that 318 bishops attended, most of them from the eastern half of the empire, men who had lived through persecution, some with scars, burns, or missing eyes from torture. For the first time, the church was not hiding from the emperors. The emperor had summoned them, and among the names recorded is Nicholas of Myra, the man who would one day become Saint Nicholas, the legendary inspiration for Santa Claus. Later stories claim that he grew so enraged at Arius' teaching that he crossed the room and slapped him across the face. Now, whether or not that actually happened is debatable. The tale of Nicholas punching Arius didn't appear until centuries later, but it captures the intensity of the debate. These were not abstract arguments. The bishops believed that the very identity of Christ was at stake. The heart of the argument turned on one Greek word, homoousios, which means of the same substance. So the bishops drafted a creed to state clearly what they believed. And this is what it said: Jesus Christ is God of God, light of light, very God of very God, begotten, not made, being of one substance with the Father. That one phrase, begotten, not made, crushed the Arian claim that Christ was a creature. Begotten means he comes from the Father, but not as something created out of nothing. He shares the Father's essence. That's why the Nicene Creed remains such a defining statement. It was not philosophical speculation. It was a boundary line. To deny the full divinity of Christ was to fall outside the faith. Well, besides condemning Arius and his followers, the council also dealt with some practical matters, like when to celebrate Easter. At the time, many Christians celebrated it alongside Passover, since Jesus died during the Jewish feast. But the bishops decided that Easter must not be tied to the Jewish calendar. Instead, it would be celebrated on the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the spring equinox. To modern ears, that formula may sound almost pagan, like something out of astrology. But that's how it was decided, and it is still used in much of the church today. This decision revealed something else. The church was eager to separate itself from its Jewish roots. Some of that came from anti-Jewish sentiment that had been growing in the empire. What began as a family quarrel between Christians and Jews had hardened into hostility. Nicaea reflected that shift. Another issue was the so-called Melitian Schism. Melitius of Lycopolis refused to restore Christians who had denied their faith during persecution. Most bishops believed that repentant believers should be welcomed back, but Melito disagreed. He ordained his own priests and created a breakaway movement called the Church of the Martyrs. Nicaea tried to resolve the division by allowing him to remain a bishop, but restricting his authority. In practice, the schism lasted for decades, and his followers later allied with the Arians. The most lasting consequence of Nicaea, you could argue, was not the creed itself, nor even the condemnation of Arius. It was the precedent of imperial power enforcing church doctrine on an entire empire. I mean, sure, Constantine ordered Arius's writings to be burned, and anyone caught with them could be killed. And he also exiled bishops who refused to accept the creed. But the bigger picture here is that the church had gained freedom from persecution only to wield the sword of persecution itself. This was the beginning of a long and uneasy marriage between church and state that would shape European history for over 1,000 years. No longer was the faith something that was freely given and received in love, but it was now entangled with emperors and armies and politics. So, did Nicaea solve the crisis? Not exactly. Arianism did not disappear. In fact, Constantine later softened his stance and allowed Arius to return. The man who baptized Constantine on his deathbed was himself an Arian. After Constantine's death, his sons and successors included Arian sympathizers. For decades, emperors and bishops swung back and forth, exiling one side and then the other. Athanasius, the great defender of the creed, was exiled 5 times. Arian Christianity spread among Germanic tribes and remained influential for centuries. It was not until the end of the 4th century, under Emperor Theodosius, that Nicene Christianity finally triumphed within the empire. And yet the Creed of Nicaea endured. Despite political turmoil, theological battles, and centuries of debate, its central claim still stands. Jesus Christ is not a created being. He is true God from true God. Why does any of this matter today? Because the question of Christ's identity has never gone away. From early heresies to modern cults, many groups have denied his full divinity. Some call him a prophet, others a created angel, others merely a moral teacher. But if Jesus is not God, then the cross cannot save. The gospel collapses. The bishops at Nicaea understood this with life and death seriousness. At the same time, Nicaea warns us about the dangers of power. The temptation to use the sword to enforce belief corrupted the church for centuries. It turned faith into politics and fueled persecution in the name of Christ. So Nicaea is both a triumph and a tragedy. A triumph because it gave us a clear confession of the divinity of Christ. A tragedy because it began the entanglement of church and empire that often obscured that very confession. The Council of Nicaea was not about deciding the Bible. It was not about inventing the Trinity. It was about defending the eternal Son of God, Jesus Christ, against a teaching that would have reduced him to a creature. It was called by a pagan-leaning emperor. It was shaped by bishops who bore the scars of persecution, and it echoed down through history in the words of the Nicene Creed. We often think of Nicaea as this great victory for Christianity, and it was. But we can't stop there. We have to remember that the early church was a persecuted minority. They had every reason to want to distance themselves from the violent, oppressive Roman Empire. But they didn't. They called a council to decide what to do, and in the end, they decided to stay. They decided to work within the system to defend the truth of Jesus Christ. And that's why the real story of Nicaea is not a conspiracy. It's a warning and a confession. Christ is Lord, begotten not made, of one substance with the Father. And that changes everything. This deep dive on the Council of Nicaea opened your eyes. Don't stop here. We're building a whole series uncovering the hidden history and prophetic connections the church rarely talks about. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and join me as we dig into the truth together. Thanks for watching.